Hello.
Okay.
I guess we'll go ahead and start.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? You can tell you all have had lunch. That was very energetic. Love to see it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel today on Final Fantasy VII, environment, energy, and everyone's favorite, capitalism. So we're going to, yeah, exactly. We're going to be getting into it.
Here's the nerd. We found them.
We found them. We're going to be just basically having a chat through some of the issues in the game around those subjects, and then we'll open up questions for yourselves to delight our expert panel. It's great to be back here at PAX again. I hope we're starting here. It can only get, well, worse, to be honest, because Final Fantasy VII, right? I don't make the rules, just play by them. So if we'll start by introducing ourselves and just a little bit what we do, 30 seconds each, if you want to start down that end.
All right, I'm going to keep it in 30 seconds. My name is Celeste Giorgio. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work at Rochester Institute of Technology in the behavioral health program. I have about 12 years of experience in practicing psychotherapy, starting with crisis work and human trafficking, and then moving into like individual therapy. And my research focuses on virtual settings and learning things in virtual settings, as well as what minimizes or maximizes whether someone's going to learn something in a game and then take it out of that game environment into their daily life.
Amazing. Well, my name is Lisa Kreveling. I go by Krev on Twitch. I'm a Twitch partner. I specialize mostly in Final Fantasy content, and I'm a huge fan of Final Fantasy VII. That's kind of brought us together over the last couple of years now. And I have played and beaten the original game 113 times. So I have a little bit of knowledge in the game. But yeah, that's me.
Yes. Hi, I'm Sarah LaBeouf. I'm a writer. I've been in games media for about 15 years. Then I've also been a video game consultant for the last few years. Yeah, when I first played Final Fantasy VII when I was 14, and it was one of those life-changing moments that just flipped some kind of switch in my brain, and nothing was ever the same after that.
Yeah. And excellent, yeah, I am, my name is Christopher Leach, and I'm a PhD researcher looking at video games and mental health in the field of psychology. Also a content creator, streamer, podcaster, all that kind of business, and also an ambassador for mental health charity Take This, who you may hear from being around the con. They've got the AFK room and the Hope booth, so do check those out. Yeah, we love Take This, yeah. So we're gonna get into it, and this I think is gonna be a seminal moment for many people here. But how did you feel the first time you stepped out of Midgar? That first moment, I remember it like thinking Midgar was surely the entire game, and then stepped out and went, there's a world with water and mountains and stuff? And being like, oh wow, there's so much to do.
Exactly, I feel like to mirror that, the first leg of the game, you're really in this like kind of dark, dingy place. You're running in like smaller settings other than when you're in those like giant kind of factories, and then all of a sudden the world map opens. So there's this like ludonarrative synchronicity, I guess, with the map opening and like your experience opening and like all the colors being more vibrant. The only exposure you have to it before that is in the church, I guess.
In Aerith's house, yeah. Yeah, I definitely would agree. I think that was one of the first times we ever really just saw vibrancy and just color, and I was like, oh my God, like Chris had mentioned, there's a whole world out here. So yeah, it was definitely exciting. It gave me an opportunity to be like, oh man, there's so much more to this game than I originally thought.
Yes, Final Fantasy VII was my first Final Fantasy game. I kind of missed out on the whole SNES era because my parents were afraid I would play too many video games, so that obviously worked out very well for them. I knew the game was going to be long because it was 3 discs, which was new for me, but I remember my brother and I were following a strategy guide from GamePro magazine, and it ended at the end of Midgar, so we thought that would probably be the end of disc 1, and then it wasn't. It kept going, and the world opened up, and it just blew our minds.
Wait, Sarah, did you have a guide for the remake? Was that a time traveling thing?
Sorry?
Did you have a guide for the remake that ends at Midgar? Like,
Did I?
time traveled it. That's amazing.
Yes.
So, do you all have a favorite location on the world map? I think like there's a few great ones to pick, but I mean, I quite like the snowy region because snowboarding minigame.
Thought about this question a lot. Like, so I wonder what everyone's favorite location is in Final Fantasy VII. I feel like there's poignant locations where things happen, and then like I was trying to think of how I feel when I'm in each location, and one of the parts that I feel like I always look forward to and really enjoy is the haunted house section of the Golden Saucer. I really didn't want it to be part of the Golden Saucer because I know we're talking about capitalism, and it's probably not
Perfect
the best.
example.
Yeah, but it's so fun, and I really like the juxtaposition of like how silly it is and the intensity of the conversations. They like meet up there to like regroup and process, and then it's a very silly haunted house where you have to like jump into the graves to like go to the different parts of it. Yeah, so I think that part always brings a smile to my face, so I'll assume that operationalizes my favorite place.
I'd say my favorite place is a tie between two. Inside of Midgar, it's Aerith's house, because it is that first real, like, and if I don't scream Aerith fangirl enough, it's one of my favorite places because it's so vibrant and it offers this like little serene little paradise in the middle of the slums. And it's interesting because then it poses so many other questions of like, well, how does she have this nice house and all these flowers when the rest of the slums is kind of suffering? But it was always one of those places that I just stopped and just like sat for a few minutes in the game. And then the second one was Cosmo Canyon for a lot of the same reason, just because it opens up that storytelling. You get to meet the best side character in the world, Bugenhagen, and all of that other stuff too.
I also really love Aerith's house. I loved it in the original, and in the remake, I think they did a phenomenal job of really bringing it to life the way it was always envisioned. It just felt like a calm, serene place in, the middle of chaos and grit. So I explored every nook and cranny trying to get all the little secrets that were in there.
Wow, you all picked like really like emotionally driven answers, and I went, snow, that's nice. I'd retire there. That'd
It's
be
a hard
great.
question.
That is a hard question, yeah.
And I wonder, do we know why Aerith's house is so nice compared to the rest of the...
I don't think it ever like explored it.
Like how she can afford a house?
She was kind of being bankrolled by Shinra.
Yeah, I
Rightly
mean,
or
she was
wrongly?
basically
Right.
protected the whole time, so a lot of it was probably along the lines of being kind of a protected person.
Yeah.
Does that make Aerith a bad guy? Wait, hold on.
right.
The panel's been turned on its
Because
head.
she gave the flowers to everybody else, so it's not like she was like hoarding it.
The opposite of capitalism. Okay, so this is a loaded question and a leading question, but you'll understand why in just a moment. So the home world for Final Fantasy VII is called Gaia. There's a lot of like Greek and Norse mythological like elements embedded into the game, which is really neat. But the world Gaia, do we think at all that Gaia is harmed during the game, and if so, how?
I think everyone would agree that it's definitely harmed in the course of the game, especially with the whole make a hole big enough to put Sephiroth in the middle, and then he can collect. I think often about like what Sephiroth was, like what his end goal was. Just gonna be flying around like as a super being. I feel like he wanted friends, and that's not a great way to make friends.
No.
But as far as how harmed Gaia is, I think such a good question is harmed for who, right? Definitely harmed for like humans, and it could become a dry world. I think that that's what you see in that like space projection in Cosmo Canyon. So if it becomes a husk, yes, it's definitely harmed.
Yeah, I'd say I pretty much agree with that. And I think also seeing like the drilling of Mako, or Mako, it's obviously, it feels very much so like how like oil drilling I think would be in a kind of one-for-one example. So yeah, that would be another way of how I would see it being harmed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's definitely harmed, and you can see that Shinra is doing most of the harming. They're very short-sighted and worried more about power and profits than the state of the planet, which, can't relate at all.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of put these sort of two questions to you at once here. But like, you start the game and you are playing an eco-terrorist. So like, at what point did you realize Final Fantasy VII was political? Because we all kind of mentioned we started playing it when we were young. That may have gone slightly over my childhood head. What about yourselves?
So I feel like an interesting thing that maybe tells you about my psychology is I didn't realize how political it was until this question was posed. But I think that's also, and I realized I didn't answer this question before, the first time I played it, I was 7 years old. So I think that it really was formative for me in how I look at things, and is probably the reason I'm so much fun at parties and what I talk about. So yeah, that's when I realized it was political. And I guess it formed the idea or the understanding that most things are inherently political, including the games that you play.
Yeah, I would say I had a very similar sort of aspect. A little bit quicker on the updraw of when it was political, but I started playing the game when it first came out into the US. It was actually gifted to my older sister when we got our PlayStation, so I played as a little kid watching her play over her shoulder, and then I just continued to play it, and I basically took it away from her, and it became my game. So I just kept playing it, and then I would say I was probably about 13 or 14 when I was getting through kind of those rebellious teenage years, and I was like, man, this game is edgy. Like, now I understand why I like this game. And I think just from there, it sort of kind of, and every time I play it, I learn a little bit more about like how political it really is and like how different aspects of it are tied to real life examples. So yeah, I would say it took me a couple of years of playing it nonstop for me to realize that. And a lot of that just had to do with age, mostly.
Yeah, the first time I played it, I wasn't thinking about politics. I only barely knew about environmentalism. I knew there was something with the ozone, but it didn't really seem like my problem. And then I guess as I became more politically aware, every time I replayed the game, I would catch a little more. Oh, this isn't just like a story about good guys and bad guys. This is, parallel to what's actually happening on our planet right now. And then the last few times I've played it, now well into my 30s, I really really see the political message, and it's it's not, it's not subtle, but when you're 14 and you're not inundated with stories of how the planet is dying every day, and you don't have access to social media and all that stuff, you just don't really think about it. You just think, okay, the game says I'm a good guy, and I'm gonna fight these bad guys, so that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, like I remember for me, like, you start and there's that first sequence when you're in the lift going down to the Mako reactor and Barrett's like, the planet is dying. And I'm like, random encounters though. This is great.
Yeah.
I can click attack. This is so much fun. So you can see we're kind of heading in a certain direction here, and you can be assured I was as surprised as you were when they let us do a panel this political, but I'm going to leave it where it is. Okay, so we've established the world, and the world has energy sources. So ethical question, is it right for us to use the live stream as a source of energy? Because this, gives us access to electricity, it helps people have power and sources of energy, and also, more importantly, gives us magic to materia, which allows us to heal people, create energy with like fire and ice and electricity. You never sort of see materia used practically. Like, have you seen energy prices these days? Some fire materia would come in handy. So how do we sort of feel about like using the live stream as a source of energy? Like,
Yeah, it's such a hard question, right? Because part of it is moral relativism, right? Like if you see someone like dying in front of you and you have a cure materia, then it seems ethical to use the cure materia. At the same time, if you're in a hot room and you can either use like an ice materia or like an AC, then it's probably more ethical to use the AC. So I think like Shinra didn't always exist, right? And there was oil, I assume, and it seems like they use a lot of steam energy as well. I'm wondering, so I guess I really think about what it's like to be someone who's in academia in all of these games, right? Like, are there people writing research on, can you use materia just to start a steam engine or like start a nuclear reactor and then it like self-perpetuates? Like we have self-perpetuating nuclear reactors here. Our problem is just that we don't know how to like throw away the waste properly. So what's the overall infrastructure that you can add materia into? Or there's also naturally occurring materia, right? So can we use that naturally occurring materia? Is the issue that materia makes a demand on the planet, whereas the naturally occurring materia is a request? I have lots of questions about like the inner philosophy and science of the world.
I'm doing the panel right when questions are creating more questions.
Yeah. I would agree. Yeah, it's a really hard moral question to stand by, like because for many of the reasons that Celeste had mentioned, that it would make more sense to use materia over using, something that's currently in the world. But I think at the end of the day, like, we realize that Shinra has this vast research facility. They're researching and developing, but what they're researching and developing is furthering materia rather than using what they have to be able to find more economic choices and more good morality choices for how they can continue to, progress into the future. So I think that's kind of where it starts getting into the gray area of, yeah, it's great to use at the beginning just to have that initial guesswork kind of taken away, okay, we know that this is here, but then at the same time, they had to know, they absolutely do know the damage that they're doing with the materia, the research, and furthering into that rather than looking into other ways to save the planet, because they weren't interested in saving the planet. They were interested in power, and they were interested in the promised land, and that was really the two main focuses of Shinra.
I've been thinking about this question since you started putting this panel together, and I still don't really have an answer. I guess I don't know enough about the world to know if there are enough viable alternatives to the live stream. But I mean, obviously, if there are, then people should use them. But I don't know. Do they have solar power? Do they have electric vehicles?
Exactly.
It's a world with magics and things, so I have to assume. And I also don't know, is there ethical consumption of the live stream? Is there an amount we can use it without, causing the planet to go into termination mode? So, yeah, I don't, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, but, I think if you're using the live stream so much that places are shriveling up and dying, that's probably a sign that you need to back off.
Yeah, and just to add, I don't know if do you want to jump into another question? Or
No, no.
Because I don't know, I think that this is such a robust question, Shinra is like a war machine, right? It prioritizes its funding in the wars, and then it kind of is in an arms race with itself, So
I'm winning.
Yeah, right? I guess you always come out on top, except everyone else loses, like the planet. So I think if they prioritize other types of funding, so I'm wondering if, well, obviously there was a space program. Maybe they could have found an asteroid or something with, they didn't
they tried that.
Yeah.
That didn't end well.
Yeah, and they
Sid might have something else to say about that program.
Yeah, and maybe they shouldn't be taking more extraterrestrials onto the planet
Yeah.
if they're full. I wonder about the ultimate weapons, right? So if they're still flying around, can you put a turbine on one of them? And like the one that's going in circles.
As if ultimate weapon wasn't a pain to try and catch anyway.
Yeah. So maybe I'm not the person to answer this question for ethical consumption, but I think, speaking of who you would ask, right, we were talking before about you can put together a panel of experts in the planet. So similar to when there's indigenous representation in films, they have a panel of indigenous experts that they speak to. And we were who would be on that panel? So I think it would potentially be, if you can set up the meeting next to the live stream, you can get Eris in there. I think Lucretia would probably be a person to have on that panel.
Red 13.
Yeah, Red 13.
And even Bugenhagen would be a good option for that,
if you
too.
can get him. Yeah, totally.
The guy's so in touch with everything.
Yeah, so I think if you can get a panel of experts that developed regulatory mechanisms and a structure, then you can consult with them. That would probably be the best option.
It's that easy to fix. Let's
Yeah.
do it. So I think it's an ethical question, right? Ultimately, it's an ethical question. There's not really a right answer. I think I kind of get the impression, and maybe someone knows more than I do in what I sort of looked at, but it's just kind of what they stumbled on and therefore just went with it. Because this leads on to the next question of well, what other energy sources could they use? We know from, I think it's a couple of chapters in On a Way to a Smile after the game, that they go back to using oil. And you're a bit lads, you don't see the same problem here? Because I think there's a scene with, I think it's Barrett and Sid and trying to get airships to run on oil. So it's what other energy sources could they have used maybe? We talked a little bit before about using materia to self-perpetuate energy. Did they have alternatives? Was it all they had?
Yeah.
I'm suddenly now sounding like a Shinra sympathizer, and I'm not sure how I feel about that.
I know, right? No, I think the same thing. And I guess the question or the answer is that there needs to be more funding so that people can answer this question, right? They need to fund researchers into
Yes, fund researchers. Yeah, do that.
Mini plug, guys. Fund researchers.
Yeah. And then also, of course, you can get a degree in medical ethics, which I assume that there'd be people who are getting degrees in materia and Mako ethics. So you'd have an ethicist on your board as well.
Can I go to school there? Because that sounds awesome.
Well, and I also was wondering, like, so you want to commune with the live stream, right, to get an idea of how you can ethically consume Mako if it's possible. Is that kind of what they were trying to do by getting more ancients on board? So have I just like recreated the origin of Shinra? You know, they're like, we need to find more ancients so that we can.
The problem is how they treated those
Yeah,
ancients. So like,
yeah.
if they were to do that in an ethical and like just positive way by not, you know, trying to kill them,
Yeah.
would be fantastic.
Modifying their bodies, which
Yeah.
is like pretty much an overarching theme, right? It happens to Eris, it happens to obviously Genova quite
Yeah.
a lot, and also all the people who are in Soldier. Too.
Any other thoughts on that now? Because like other energy sources, like what could they have used? Like I think they had options, right? They had options.
I'm telling you, put a turbine on on the ultimate weapon.
I would just say solar, personally.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we're moving to that in kind of a real life setting too. So it's like, it makes the most sense. And it's free as long as it's, you know, sunny outside.
Yeah, tidal.
Don't have to worry about another meteor. That might have a little bit of an impact on it.
Yeah.
So you know I mentioned about sounding like a Shinra sympathizer. Okay, so Shinra uses their money to fund science, and this is theoretically designed to help people, right? Like to have like a residential division. You know, are they sort of really the baddies? Because we're juxtaposed to we have Avalanche, who are another group of people who are acting against this other group, and it's David versus Goliath, and we join their side, which positions us in the game. But are Shinra really the baddies? They're just trying to like get access to energy. Listen, I know the answer. Okay, it's a question. They have access to energy and they're trying to provide for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if it's like a binary yes/no, then the answer is definitely yes there. But I think what's so like powerful and one of the like sustaining parts of Final Fantasy VII is that it shows that there's like a casual cruelty. Like there's a lot of like cogs in the machine that like keep things moving along. So, for example, Cloud becoming a soldier, or anyone who becomes a soldier really, perpetuating the war. Reeve is such an interesting character because he's perpetuating things until he finally like breaks the cycle. So Shinra as an organization, absolutely. There's a branch of psychology called industrial and organizational psychology, which is like looking at businesses as having personalities. And I think Shinra would definitely have a disordered personality or something is off there. But it's all those little people along the way that keep the machine moving, that are neither good nor bad, or are acting badly in so much as they're not like thinking about how they're perpetuating it. And once they reflect, they have that opportunity to change their contribution.
I think initially, if you look at what they started with, I would say no. And the reason why I would say no is because it's how they morphed into the awful creature that they became.
Foreshadowing for later questions.
Yeah, for like greediness. Greediness is ultimately what taught them that this is where their power is going to come from. So they basically neglected everything else, and I want power, and that was it. And while we can see, yeah, they're throwing money at research and all this wonderful stuff, but it's research for one or two very specific things instead of a general well-being for everybody else. They don't care about the rest of the people. They care about themselves, their pockets, and their promised land. And that was where they kind of took the turn from doing something very positive to doing something that could be as detrimental as it was.
Yeah. I think, like anything else, science isn't inherently good or evil. It's all in how you use it. And I think the people at the top of Shinra are definitely using it for evil. They're using it for personal gain at the cost of just about everyone else on the planet. So yeah, it's pretty easy to say that Shinra is the bad guys, but like any company, there are probably people who are just trying to make a living, they're trying to get by. Economic realities are a thing, so I'm sure there are a lot of people further down the chain that struggle with their ability to come to work every day.
That's relatable. Okay, so any Crisis Core fans in? Oh, wow, okay, that's a minority. I'm less afraid of asking this question. So obviously we have Shinra, and they literally wage wars to build Mako reactors. We see this with the war with Wutai, expanded on in Crisis Core, and like, our heroes, Sephiroth, Zack, and Cloud, all work for Shinra? Like, are we really the good guy in Crisis Core if we're just like, yay, Wutai, we're gonna win?
Can I jump in on this one? So I want to parallel this to being in the military in real life. So this is something that people ask me about constantly. It's like, oh, you were in the military, you must love these wars. No, we want to help people and we want to do the things that are right, but at the same time, it's a very similar kind of duality with Zack and Cloud and Sephiroth. They joined to make a difference, they joined to better themselves, they joined for a myriad of other reasons that did not involve them being pro-war. And that's kind of something that I always kind of took from that, just being, because I'm retired Air Force. So people have asked me that all the time. They'll come in and be like, oh, well, you must have loved this. And I'm like, no, I want to help people, and I joined because I wanted to help people. And I think for them, it also started that way as well. I mean, we're looking at the backstories of all three of these characters, and they wanted to make something of themselves, and that's why they joined. I mean, we remember the windmill with Tifa and Cloud. He's like, I want to be the best, and I want to, and she's like, just come save me if you get all famous, and all that stuff. And same for Zack. Like, we learned that Zack wanted to like be the best that he could and learn more and grow more. And I think that kind of duality is where it kind of lies for me.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think what this speaks to is that you're always going to have different things, I guess, pieces of propaganda or cultural narratives that are trying to give you an identity that you can buy into, right? So Cloud wants to be a hero, he wants to get out of his town, and here's an easily palatable thing that he can latch onto. And I think one of the most impactful pieces of Final Fantasy VII is that you can always renegotiate your identity and turn that around, right? Same with Reeve. He wants to be helpful, and he thought he was being helpful through making Mako reactors. Turns out that did not work out, and Cloud is not the hero he thought he was, and so everyone gets to renegotiate their sense of self and reinterpret the propaganda that they've been kind of fed, and yeah, I think that's a through line across the entire game.
Yeah, it's a complicated question. Again, it's not like a strict good or evil thing, especially for people. I'll say that Cloud never seemed particularly happy to be fighting with or against Shinra. He just kind of grumpy. But for a kid like Cloud, joining Shinra is the only way to make a living, the only way out of his hometown. And that's comparable to people that enroll in the military right out of high school. That might be their only way to go to college, the only way to support their families, and that doesn't mean they necessarily agree with every order they're given, but again, we live in a capitalist society where people have to find a way to survive, and I think in the case of Zack and Cloud, they're just trying to survive. I think, Zack probably believed in the mission at first because they sold him on it. It's not like Shinra's recruiting by saying hey, come join the evil empire, y'all. It's like, no, join Shinra. We help people. We're great. We give you energy. Aren't we nice? So, it's not unusual to work for a company and then once you spend some time in the company culture, find out it was not what you thought it was going to be. So.
Not at all relatable, am I right? And I think it's really interesting for me as well, and we've talked about this with the locations, but Cloud is a kid, and Shinra Manor is there, it's by a Mako reactor in Mount Nobel, and if you think about the parts of the world that are untouched by Shinra, there's Mideel? That's about it. The only place I can think of where they don't seem to actively be under Shinra's influence. Maybe Templed as well, I guess. Well, they were trying to get in there, weren't they, I suppose. And particularly with Zack as well, but Gungaga is it's one of the few places outside Midgard that is quite run down because the Mako reactor has since shut down, right? Mm-hmm. And the people there, it's framed in a really sad context. Oh, our Mako reactor shut down, so our town is now without prosperity. I think that's really interesting positionally to consider that. Mm-hmm. So I'm aware that I answered that, and then I'm now going to ask the next question, which is a bit windy, so I apologize. For people that don't like the sound of my voice, you can leave. Mm-hmm. So when we save the Earth, and I don't know if there's any Advent Children or Dirge fans in.
Woo.
Oh, a bit more than Crisis Core. Okay, good. I'm learning. Technically, the game ends with a cliffhanger sort of movie scene, spoilers, where we see Red 13, and we save the planet, lifestream stops Meteor, Holy, all that magic stuff, right? But like, things immediately after that we see in Dirge and Advent Children, where the lifestream is no longer being used, did we actually save the world? Or should we have just let the weapons destroy it?
Me first. Okay. I think, it depends on what you mean by save, right? It's a changed world, and I think that I feel like it can be good. I mean, Midgar is destroyed, or at least as it was, it's destroyed. It seems like potentially a lot of the world is rewilded, and I don't know if people are living in a more like harmonious way. Maybe they set up that panel of experts and they found out how to better commune with a live stream. I also wonder, I mean, like, if the world is broken in such a way that the live stream is exposed, is that how, like, can we keep talking to the live stream? Can we keep that channel open? Or does it have to, like, kind of close up and things heal in a way that...
And for the sake of argument, we'll assume Sephiroth isn't actively meandering in the live stream, just for ease.
So... That's I guess I'm undecided, is my answer.
Yeah, I would say it left a lot open for translation. So I think that if you ask somebody, their opinion might be different just because we have kind of an open idea and we don't have the full details of what exactly happened. So I think in the grand scheme of things, you have to define what saving looks like, and you have to decide who is being saved. Is it the planet that's being saved, or is it the people that are being saved?
Exactly.
Well, at the end of the game, we stopped Meteor destroying Earth and all people on it. That would have got rid of everyone, right? We can agree on that. So yeah, it's like, well, what is being saved? Because if the planet and the weapons feed into this, they are the planet's self-defense mechanism that is just looking after itself. Mm-hmm. So like, is Gaia like a third player in the game? You know?
Yeah.
I like what you said about thinking about the planet versus the people. I never really thought about it that way. But I feel like we see this theme a lot in fantasy, and particularly in RPGs, where the bad guy just like, this world sucks. Let's just axe it. like let's not even try. And for me, I think you should always try. So if I was in Cloud's party, I would probably fight the weapons and do the same thing. I would want to do everything in my power to make things better. And then even if it didn't work, like at least I know I tried to do something, as the planet burns.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm too cynical. I just let the weapons get on with it.
Yeah. Well, I think, look at it this way, right? It's like, if it's saved for the planet itself, right, and like there's still nature and other things, is there a guarantee that there won't be another sentient race and they'll eventually like discover Mako again and so forth? So maybe the role of the players can be to break the like intergenerational trauma of like sentient beings and the planet by negotiating like a healthier way. And so in a way that is kind of like Armageddon because it's such a radical shift,
Yeah. Okay, this is like, I'm so happy because this is like the really broad philosophical stuff that I wanted. You all probably just thought, fun Final Fantasy panel.
It is
And
fun.
here we
We're
are.
having fun.
So this next one is again, framed in a fun way. But like, what do you think is Shinra's actual downfall?
Greed.
Spoiler, it's capitalism. But like, again, they were only stopped because people tried to stop them. Like, if you take Avalanche out of the equation, would Shinra eventually self-combust?
It's interesting, right? Because I was thinking, like, if it was a different system, like if it was a monarchy, would Shinra still fall? And I think yes, right? So it's some construct that's like closely aligned with capitalism, whether it's like they had to show expansion in their quarterly profits, or I assume they have quarterly profits like we have.
So yeah.
They had to show that the company continued expanding and so forth. So potentially it's something, it is the greed. I think that they really pointed themselves in the wrong direction, like cutting the space program, just like creating all these Mako reactors before they really researched what was happening, or conversely, silencing the researchers that were doing the deeper work, like I think it is a guest, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Aris's father, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of things lead to Shinra's downfall, and they typically all have to do with capitalism. But I think one of the problems is they thought they were too big to fail, and they got really arrogant. They thought they would always be in power. And something you see with people who are in power and corrupt is they assume everyone thinks the exact same way they do. They think all people are like this. So they think they'll be able to hold on to their power forever. So they team up with Sephiroth, who's basically a god, and he's like, doesn't really need them, far more powerful than them, and thinks like, oh yeah, this guy will always remain under our control, no problem. What could possibly go wrong, you know? And the same with, they underestimated Cloud and his group. They thought they could just brand them as terrorists and blame them for destroying the slums, and people would just follow it, But it's their own arrogance. Like they just had no safeguards in place. I mean, they just go into Shinra Tower and climb up all the stairs. Like there's no security guards in there at all. So
Yeah, that's a good point. I think if I can pivot, I think hubris is such a big part of their downfall. Like they really, and to bring back Reeve again and Cat Sith, like there are opportunities to change your direction, right? And they never slowed down, regroup. They didn't have any regulatory bodies, right? Who was checking on Scarlet? Who was like, why didn't anyone stop her? What were the...
I think they also just underestimated human emotion. And I think that obviously plays pretty dramatically out in our character in our party. We see Cloud, just even how he kind of grew as a person and started realizing all the things and how much he hated them. Like, because he knew he hated Shinra, but he didn't know why until much later. And his memories started coming back and he started figuring out things. And I think they just kind of, especially with the soldier program, we're looking at them doing all these experiments, and they assumed that all of these experiments would then just be completely loyal to them when that wasn't the case. I mean, we see Zack having that realization in Crisis Core. We have Cloud realizing that later on throughout the game, and likewise with other monsters that have tried to attack Shinra because of their, connection to it.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, yeah, like I think the thing for me is especially, it's the way like they handle the response, like the propaganda of like, yeah, it's all these guys, and we kind of know through, I'm gonna say other sources for spoilery reasons, but like with the initial Mako reactor bombing, they actually made it worse. It was Shinra that made it blow up even more to make it more political. So I think that's really interesting. So we were talked about like the people involved in the system. It's arguable that Professor Hojo is the real villain of the game, because he is the one that perpetuated the science in such a way for money reasons. Funny how all those people with doctorates turn out to be the villains though, right? So is he the real villain? Is he the one that really perpetuates it? Or do you think it was just that cyclical money? Like if we were going to blame a person in Shinra, who would it be?
I think it's both. I think as a researcher myself and someone who absolutely has to focus on like grant deliverables, right? I get funding to do research and I need to provide deliverables to show that, this type of like video game that does therapy is impacting someone's substance use, for example. Hojo was able to exploit that system, right? Professor Gast had deliverables on like the planet and his projects, and Hojo like edged in and was like, I could get you those deliverables faster in a more like intense way. And so I think the villain, I guess, is the system that he was able to exploit, but also very much so him. Like he was running around injecting people and calling them.
So the villain was, wait for it, capitalism.
Yeah. There's a term in research or science, it's garbage in, garbage out. And I feel like you can definitely, Hojo's research was garbage in, garbage out, for
Nice.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other, we can agree he's kind of the villain, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, any other thoughts on that? No? Okay, so we've talked a bit about alternatives. Do we think Shinra could have done things ethically? Like if Cloud had walked in and there's that bit where he meets the president, if he'd have gone, listen, mate, sort this out, do you think they could have done it?
Yes, if they wanted to.
So you think it's possible with the live stream and a way of changing that?
I think it could have been, yeah. Like, I'm optimistic in the fact that I think that if given the right people in power, given the right tools, and given the right counsel, I think it could have shaped into something that would have been a benefit to society in general, and wouldn't have gone down such a dark and ugly path that it did. But again, that's dependent on those three core things, like who is running it. Like, as long as we don't have any of, the people that are currently in there just muddying the waters, I think it could potentially be turned into something that could have been very beneficial, and not only from a research standpoint, but also just for the people of Midgar, and really just the people of the world in general.
Yeah, that's a good point. If we look at the discovery of Mako and materia as inevitable, then having an organization that could pivot to like have a panel or a different discussion around it should be possible, or hopefully would be possible, because if not, it just means that things are just always going to end. Would Shinra be able to do it? Maybe. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I know that Rufus definitely has opinions about how his father ran things and the propaganda. He's like, I'm going to rule through fear, which is also not great. So maybe if there was a different person in charge or some sort of regulatory body. But I don't know, is it possible to regulate something that picks up that much steam? Would it be something that, for example, had to be in the hands of the people, which would not be capitalist, right? So interesting questions.
Yeah, I think like we discussed earlier, we don't know the perfect answer to what the most ethical live stream usage is, but it's pretty safe to say Shinra could have done a little better ethically. I mean, when you're treating human lives as just blips on a spreadsheet, that's pretty evil. It's not very hard to get better from there. So even if they didn't right away reverse all their policies and start saving the planet, they had so many resources, so much money, so much power, they could have been leading the charge to find a better way. But that would have meant less profit in the short term, and less control over the people because they were controlling the energy source. So, yes, even though we don't have the perfect solution, and this is something you see a lot, especially if you get in online arguments with people like I do because I can't help myself, and they'll say well, if we shouldn't be using such and such, then what should we do instead? And if you don't have an answer right away, it's just checkmate. Yeah. Nothing we can do. There's nothing to be done about it, and that's not true. Just have to take the time to do that, and that could have been Shinra's legacy, but instead they have a legacy of being super evil.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Chris.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, that's pretty much.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about there's such a focus on tearing things down, right? But often when things get torn down, the most vulnerable people are the people who really suffer. So, I mean, Shinra's already been crushing people under their heel. There are people suffering, but what decision would minimize the most suffering moving forward? Is it ripping it all down and creating a new system? Potentially, but also if you rip it down, is it going to create a power vacuum where there's all these mini companies and they start doing Mako energy, and then there's this weird horrible I guess capitalism is still going to exist. So is that just going to recreate the circumstances for another Shinra? Where are all the Shinra employees going to go? Are they going to get hired by new Shinra shell companies? I don't know. Maybe that's fatalistic. That's what I was talking about, being political and fun at parties.
Great parties. It's all good. So this is both a sweeping question, but I'm going to try and ask you to reduce this if you can. Final Fantasy VII came out in 1997, so it's getting on a bit now. What lessons do you think we can take from it to prevent our seemingly inevitable Meteor-esque situation in real life? Because there are parallels there. The game is, betwixt and between 25 and 30 years old now. What do you think, the argument was there that we were warned that things weren't going to get better, and yet we just followed this path anyway. What's the one lesson that you think you could sort of take away from that or build on to help our dystopian future?
Well, I think, as I was saying before, I think one of the biggest things is that it's never too late to renegotiate your identity and to change the course that you're on, right? Reeve did that with Cat Sith. Cloud definitely changes his relationship to the idea that he is someone who like protects other people. Barrett goes through the same exact process. What does it mean to be someone who protects others? And how do I do that in a way that I don't feel like tortured? And then you have Dine as a foil to him, right? He refuses to renegotiate his identity and experiences quite a bad outcome. So I think that would be the takeaway. Like, it's never too late to really sit down, reflect about the identities that you've been handed to believe about yourself, and then figure out how you actually relate to those and what you want to believe about yourself and how you can get there, kind of.
I would say just one voice is never too small, would be just my single line. Like, as long as there is one person that's standing up for it and being vocal about it, there will eventually be others. But people often think that sometimes just one voice is never going to be enough to make change, and that's not at all true. You may have to say it 1,000 times to get your second person, your third person, but having that one person that's there can always have an option of changing the world from there.
Yeah. I think one of the lessons is you can only push people so far and do so much harm before they fight back. And, if you take so much from people that they have nothing left to lose, that's when they become dangerous. And that's what the big evil corporations in games that in real life never expect is, people are not just going to take this forever. They just, at some point, they need to fight back because there's nothing left for them to do. So.
I think it's really interesting as well because, I read a lot of sci-fi dystopia, and a lot of these stories are really old, and it's eerie how close to reality it kind of is. And you kind of want to, does someone read this and go, that's a brilliant idea, we should do this, not realizing it was sort of almost satirical. And I think it's really interesting. I think particularly when, to pick up what you were saying, Sarah, as someone who's British, where we're having lots of strikes at the moment because workers have had enough. With years of just sort of austerity being okay, listen, we need to actually use our rights. It's interesting to know that people can have the power to kind of turn that back around. And I think that's really, really useful. So I just want to end with a nice few easy questions to wind down before we open the floor to yourselves to give us some questions. So nice, easy one. Can you have ethical consumption under capitalism?
I thought you said easy.
A nice, easy question to answer. I mean...
They weren't jumping to answer that one, were they? Oh.
I think as a millennial, for me, I'm going to go ahead and say capitalism isn't really working for me. I did everything I was supposed to do. I went to college. I've been working forever. But it's not enough. Nothing is enough anymore. But, am I unethical for participating in the capitalist society I was born into? What's the alternative? People say, oh, go live in socialist Europe. And it's yeah, I would if they would take me, but that's really hard and also will require a certain amount of privilege to just be able to pick up and go somewhere else.
It's also not that much better.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, it's still not great over the Atlantic, I can say.
I think those in power, and I'm talking politicians and CEOs who are enforcing the ruthless, aggressive capitalism that we're used to, I think it's easy to say that that's unethical. They might not know any other way, but I feel like if you're in a position of power or privilege, it's your job to use that to help others, and they're just not interested in that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, am I just going to say we live in a society?
That's what I was going to say.
But, I was thinking about what we were talking about earlier, Eris is definitely, victimized, but she also, receives funding, and then she uses that to, maximize people's, comfort and minimize suffering, so maybe that's the only way to really ethically, if you exist in such a way that I don't want to be too utilitarian, because obviously then you could become a happiness pump, right? You guys, anyone watch The Good Place? But, if you are generally trying to maximize happiness, your own being one of those, right? By sitting, reflecting, negotiating your identity, that's pretty radical, and I think maybe you can't be ethical, but you can be radical in your consumption.
Get that on a t-shirt. You can't be ethical, but you can be radical.
Yeah, I was about to say, you pretty much made a much more eloquent version of what I was going to say.
Same
so,
idea. We live in
yeah.
a society.
I honestly think, I think if I was going to be, I'm going to have an opinion, I'm going to say no. I don't think you can. I think you can minimize negative impact, like your green businesses, local businesses, these kind of things, like, and reduce the harm done. But I just don't think there is a way for it to be done right. If I was going to be really subtle, I don't think it's possible. Like, we could have chosen a life of art and expression and just like chilling out on the beach, but we chose capitalism and taxes. Like, why? We could have chosen another path, and part of that philosophically really upsets my soul. And I'm never going to be able to get over that.
Well, I guess it's cumulative, right? And I think that that's what you were talking about too. Like if you have these radical moments and other people do too, like eventually you kind of come together and you make like a bigger and bigger impact. I just keep thinking about like Full Metal Alchemist the more I think about this panel, you know? So, yeah.
So we would like to open up for the last sort of 10 minutes to questions from yourselves. So there is a mic that you can sort of queue up there if you'd like to. If mobility is not like your friend, just put a hand up and there is a movable mic as well. But I think just while everyone's getting in line, what if the audience only remembers one thing from this panel, from yourself, what would you like it to be?
It's radical to make a space for yourself and others, and I think that that's something that's really conveyed in like the 20 hours of gameplay of Final Fantasy VII.
Go ahead, I got to think of mine.
I think the one thing I would want people to take away is to remember to never stop fighting. You know, even though things often seem impossible and it's easy to just, you know, hide under the covers and ignore it all, which I want to do some days. You know, there's always hope. So just never stop fighting for good.
Yeah, I'd say for me, it's your voice is never too small.
And I think for me, it'd just be, you know, even in 2023, things like this can happen right now with all you here, with us here. And that gives me a little bit of hope in the old heart. And those that know me will know that's pretty strange. I'm not ill, don't worry. Okay, questions?
Hey, great panel. So we know that, like, the ills of capitalism and overconsumption are kind of a big theme in the game, but how do you guys think that the trauma of being in a capitalist society plays into a lot of the decisions that people made, including like some of the people who were maybe on Shinra's side? And then specifically, a little side question is, how much do you think Shinra cherry-picked their statistical data to get good results?
So I'm glad you mentioned trauma, because we did a panel on that last year you can check out on YouTube. And in terms of like the data, for me, I think like they probably didn't have data. They were just like, we have all the money, screw the rules.
Yeah.
I don't see any other takes on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think like just so much of existing within capitalism, and I thought this with my own patients, like sometimes the diagnosis feels like it kind of is existing in a capitalist society because it takes all of your energy that you would be using for like self-improvement or like coping skills. Like you can't even use a coping skill because you've experienced trauma and it's weighing on you, it's taking up your time and energy. So I think it absolutely contributes, I guess, for a very in-depth listen to our panel from last year. But it is also the pressure that's put on people to renegotiate their identity. Barrett has to go through so much processing to really make that radical space and find his people and be an eco-terrorist. So,
Yeah, next question.
Hi, so earlier in the panel, you did mention the idea of materia being used as an alternative compared to Mako energy, but materia is in a way directly linked to the deities of the Final Fantasy universe. Putting the idea of religion out there and ethics, would it really be a better idea to basically use the gods and that potentially benefit society out of it?
I'll be really honest with you, we were this close to making it like a religion in Final Fantasy VII panels.
Yeah.
So like, there's a lot of mythological stuff in there. There's a lot of I think you would, I don't know if this is too bold to say, but like you would end up with a system of control. So it's hard to determine if that would be better if you're using that as the guise. But like, I think the principle we kind of got onto was like, if we physically had this orb of materia that we could use our own energy to create fire, would that balance it out? If that makes sense. So maybe come back next year. We'll try and do that panel. Like-
Yeah, I actually did my degree dual in psychology and religion, and one of my professors would always say, if you can't really understand what this passage is saying about like God, replace it with the world, right? So can I exist in a way that's compatible with the world? And so I guess, one of the reasons that we were thinking about that like panel, is there a way to communicate with the deities and get a sense of what would be the compatible way, right? I guess I just can't say it's incompatible without knowing how the materia could be used. And then if there's feedback that it just completely is impossible, then we're back to putting the turbines on the ultimate weapons.
Hi, I was wondering, I just finished the remake, thank you, and it might be just not remembering much from the original game, but it felt like the politics of the remake were heightened. They added a lot more side dialogue and nuance and a lot of sharper contrast to it. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit on how both the original and the remake treated the politics.
The mayor. Wow, you'll drop the ball on that one.
It's the best.
There we go. Yeah, she said it. I think because the remake takes place in Midgard in its entirety, that gives it the room to expand. I think there is definitely a lot more like in the sort of subtext of the original game, but I think it's still inherent. Like the taste is still there, but it's a bit stronger in the remake. Maybe is how I'd put it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Next question.
Hi, so kind of taking this idea of like ethical consumption or capitalism, and I think the consensus is that maybe there's like not really any ethical consumption, but how do you personally hold like this game with such strong themes and like such quite radical themes coming from a company like Square Enix, who now is like going into NFTs and like doing all these other things, and like how, like, I mean, I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan, so like obviously I get excited about games, but when I remember where it comes from, like now, it really kind of bums me out. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you think about the two?
That's a great question. So that's actually something that I am very vocal about, typically just within my own circles, because I am very against NFTs, and apologies for any of you that may be into it, not me. And that's kind of where I lump back into your voice is never too small, and I will take whatever avenue I can to tell them how much like me and many other people that we know don't like this. And really that's the best thing that we can do at this point, but it is something that like weighs heavily on me because people are like, oh man, you love Final Fantasy. Oh, you must be pro NFTs. I was like, no. I was like, you look at Final Fantasy VII, the one game that's standing up against the corrupt things, and like I feel like I'm that in the game in real life.
But
for that
Krev,
kind of
you can buy an NFT to show how much you like it.
No, absolutely not. I will buy Final Fantasy VII on every platform twice. I've already done it once, and may as well just do it twice instead of buying an NFT.
And that's the thing, right? They only have done it because they think it will make them money. And it
Yeah.
probably will, because people
It's a
will buy
greed
it.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, it's the same, like, we live in a society. I guess I just have, like, so many thoughts at once, because it reminds me of something that David Bowie wrote about his own, like, philosophy with art. Like, once you create it, it's, like, out there, and it just exists. It's kind of, like, static in time. But then I also think, like, Final Fantasy hired writers and artists to create this vision, so those artists and writers aren't necessarily the people selling the NFT. So, because initially my mind went to like death of the author, but then I was like, who's the author? Is the author Square Enix, or is the author like the people who wrote the script? I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting question. Yeah.
It can be really hard to separate the art from the artist or the content from its creator, and it's kind of a choice everyone has to make for themselves. There are very few instances where it's just very like, oh, that person is terrible, and so the art should not be consumed at all, or else you're a bad person. But yeah, there's definitely a certain irony to, Square Enix engaging in the kind of practices it does now, as 25 years after releasing this incredibly meaningful game, which is, for a lot of us who grew up in the 90s, the first thing that really got us thinking about environmentalism in the first place. So.
So unfortunately, we've only got 2 minutes left, so we're happy to like chat your questions afterwards. But I think it'd be great just at first if you'd all join me in thanking my brilliant panelists for bringing this to us. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great being here with you all. Do you want to just go around and just tell people where they can find us? You want to start with it?
Where you can find me? Oh, you mean like on the internet? Yeah. I was like, I'll be around. Yeah.
Right
where,
here.
where are you hanging out later? Like, I don't know.
I'll be here all weekend. So I am on like Twitter as Professor Celester. Yeah, you can always email me. So I know we talked about like theories and ideas. I'm always happy to send people like academic resources too. So always email me, tweet at me, and I'll send you that information too.
Awesome. And you guys can find me. I'm on Twitch at twitch.tv/Krev. I'm also KrevLMTV on Twitter. I talk about Final Fantasy XIV, nerd stuff, mental health, and physical health, and all of that. You can find me at any of those platforms.
You can find me on Twitter at Sarah the Beef, one word, and yeah, I would like to talk about video games with people.
Yeah, you can find me at Chris L. Syke on Twitter, and I go by a few other different names, but there's a link tree, it's all there. Yeah, again, please just join me in thanking my panel. This has been great. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have as well. Thanks for PAX for having us, and we'll see you around.